Assalamu alaikum. Today I'm very excited to share with you a major discovery that was uncovered due to the research that I've conducted, alhamdulillah, into the story of Musa, specifically about the story relating to Musa's hand. I know that some people will refuse to believe, and some people will choose to cling to what they learned from the old books and from the story of the Torah. If you are interested in learning what the Quran truly is telling us, I invite you to listen with an open heart. The story started when I was working on the translation and the interpretation of Surah Al-Qasas, which is chapter number 28. And that involves pretty much the story of Prophet Musa's early years before his exodus out of Egypt. I stopped at verse number 14, which basically says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلما بلغ أشده واستوى آتيناه حكما وعلما. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us when he reached his prime in terms of strength and he became balanced, we gave him the ability to determine and knowledge. And the word wastawa, which is when he became balanced, stopped me. I didn't really understand to what that was referring. Now I compared this verse to another verse from Surah Yusuf, a very similar verse, except it's missing that word, wastawa. Exactly the same verse, but it's missing that word. And I really did not understand what this word was referring to. And it is part of my methodology in interpreting the Quran and offering an accurate and faithful translation of the Quran to stop at things that I didn't really understand. I did not want to go to other translations. I did not want to go to the commentaries because I knew that these other translations and the prior commentaries on the Quran, all of them brought the story of Musa from the Torah. Prophet Musa is mentioned by name 137 times in the Quran. This told me that his story is extremely important for us to establish what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to learn. Now, I continued with this chapter and I arrived at another verse, verse number 15. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the scene where Musa entered the city incognito and he was on a mission of some sort and he killed a person. As I said in a earlier segment, he killed one of the Israelites. What matters is the description that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala included about that incident in the Quran. So in verse number 15 or ayah number 15, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the incident as فَوَكَزَهُ مُوسَى فَقَضَى عَلَيْهِ. Musa poked him and finished him off. This concept of poking him and finishing him off really stopped me because the scene is clearly killing someone. Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse number 15 simply use the word he killed that person? Now, in my methodology that I extracted from the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up the verses to those who ask questions. After this, I continued with the story of Musa after I collected all the verses that related to the story of Musa up to the Exodus. And I gathered all of these verses in sequence and tried to understand the sequence of events because, as you know, the story of Musa is dispersed throughout over 35 different chapters of the Quran. And sometimes the same scene is described in 2 or 3 different ways, and you have to put them together and try to understand what happened. And so I continued to the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the scene where Musa was called by Allah to go on a mission and to deliver the Israelites. And that first encounter with the voice that represented Allah's will. The incident, as you know, involved the staff. You know, Musa used to carry a stick. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Taha asks Musa, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked Musa, what is this in your right hand, Moses? Moses answered, it is my staff. أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا, and I will translate this shortly. وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي, I use it to gather my flocks. وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. And in this staff, I have other uses. The first thing that stopped me is, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking Musa, what is this in your right hand? Does Allah not know? And the answer, of course, Allah knew. But this is a way of the Quran telling us, pay attention, there is something unique here. And what's unique clearly is yaminika, your right hand. And then I continued, قال هي عصاي أتوكأ عليها. This is my staff, أتوكأ عليها. I looked up all the commentaries and all the translations, and all of them says, I lean on it. Now the word أتوكأ does not mean I lean. أتكئ means I lean, but there's an extra wow. So I searched for that verb, وكأ, and I found that it is to tie. And then I was really confused because Musa in this verse is saying, I use it to tie things. So that was the second confusing question that came up in these two verses. And then the third question is at the end of this verse, verse number 18. وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. In this staff, I have other uses. I asked myself, what other uses is he referring to? Of course, you can use it for other things, such as, pull something from on high, or use it to, push a door. Or, there are a million things. But why is the Quran pointing this out specifically in this unique language? I continued. I reached verse number 22 in Surah Taha, the same surah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about his hand again. وَاضْمُمْ يَدَكَ إِلَى جَنَاحِكَ تَخْرُجْ بَيْضَاءَ مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوءٍ. Join your hand to your underarm. It will come out white, bayda, with no harm. And this is another sign. And then that stopped me again. Here he's using the word yadaka, your hand. Over there he's using your right hand. Now, is there a difference between hand and right hand? Did he mean one hand in the first place and another hand in the second place? Is this pointing to the left hand, for example, in verse number 22? And why did he need to have it join his underarm? Now, this left hand, that if it is talking about the left hand, he is describing it as it will come out white with no harm. What kind of harm is he talking about? Now, this min ghayri su', with no harm, is repeated again in two other verses that describe exactly the same scene. Watch on the screen and you'll see in Surah An-Naml, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَدْخِلْ يَدَكَ فِي جَيْبِكَ تَخْرُجْ بَيْضَاءَ مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوءٍ. Slip your hand into your opening, into your pocket opening or your chest opening. It will come out white with no harm. Here it is again. And Surah Al-Qasas, اسلك يدك في جيبك تخرج بيضاء من غير سوء. And slip your hand through the opening in your shirt. It will come out white with no harm. Now, this with no harm, min غير سوء, really is driving us to pay attention. It is no coincidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us there is something going on here. The most amazing part is that this sign, unlike the miracle of the staff which turned into a snake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referred to this display of the hand in two verses, but in one scene that was repeated. And that is the scene when Musa first returns to Egypt and he enters to visit and warn Pharaoh in his palace for the first time. Only in that case he displays the hand. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the exact same description in both times. First one in Surah Al-A'raf, number 108. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as وَنَزَعَ يَدَهُ فَإِذَا هِيَ بَيْضَاء لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. And he pulled out his hand, yanked it, which indicates that it was hidden somehow. وَنَزَعَ يَدَهُ, it's like pulling something out of something else. وَنَزَعَ يَدَهُ, he pulled out his hand, and there it was, white for all to see. The exact same description is in Surah Ash-Shu'ara. I was really confused. All of these signs, all of these verses are pointing out something that we should pay attention to. I went back and then I revisited Surah Taha that describes this. Clearly in the first verse, number 17 of Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing out to a right hand, and then he told him, throw that staff and then pick it up again. And therefore, when he picked it up, he was holding it again in his right hand. And now he's talking to him about a hand, which meant that it was a left hand that he was talking about. So the left hand needed to be slipped throughout the pocket, meaning throughout the opening of his shirt, and then it will come out white with no harm. Now, I went back. This miracle is described as when he pulled out his hand, it would almost shine like a light. So all of these descriptions had no basis in what I was reading. There was no evidence that the word bayda meant illuminating. Bayda simply means white. But in Arabic, the word abyad or bayda has so many different meanings. One of them means pure. And in fact, this is the way the Prophet ﷺ used that word in one of his reported, narrated hadith. He says, لَقَدْ جِئْتُكُمْ بِهَا بَيْضَاءَ نَقِيَّةً. He's describing the message of Islam, and he's saying, I brought it to you pure and original. Bayda, in that sense, it is original and pure. So therefore, bayda means to the original form. And there I understood exactly what the Quran is talking about. So all of these verses are talking about a situation where Musa's left hand had been deformed or cut off or harmed or burned, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that hand regrow to its original form. And this is the miracle that nobody has talked about before. Now, why is this so powerful? Because it explains so many things. It was Fir'aun who had caused this harm to his hand. It was Fir'aun who had punished Musa for something he did, and we will explain this later in the rest of the story of Musa when we get to it, inshallah, in other future segments. Musa's hand was deformed or cut off or burned, which they all knew that Musa had suffered that kind of amputation or deformity to his hand due to their actions. They knew this. When Musa alayhi salam first went to the palace of Fir'aun, and therefore when they saw it again fully restored to its original condition, they were totally stunned. Now, before you rush and say this is impossible, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not talk about this, I would like you to consider that there are many animals living today that we can see for ourselves and read about in books of science. Those animals may lose one of their arms or tails, and that arm or that tail regrows. Among them are lizards, and among them the stone crabs. Many different animals have this ability to regrow their organs. So this is not impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that he gave this miracle to Prophet Musa to prove that he was sent by the creator of all creatures is not far-fetched. Now, here we have uncovered a new discovery about the story of Musa that did not come from the Bible, that did not come from any of the books of the tafsir or commentary on the Quran, and yet it's staring us in the face. Now I challenge you to go back and read these verses, number 14 of Surah Al-Qasas, when he reached his prime in strength and became balanced. You could say it means a metaphorical type of balance, but perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to point out to us that he became balanced because one of his hands, which was missing before, was restored, and now he had two hands and he was able to be balanced again. In Surah Al-Qasas again, number 15, وَكَزَهُ Musa, he poked him and he killed him. The word poke is to use something sharp, like a knife or a staff, and it is very appropriate for a one-handed man to use an instrument for killing that would be sharp and pokey to quickly kill his enemy. And that's exactly what this verse is describing. In Surah Taha, number 17, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى, he was holding the staff with his right hand, and he says, قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا. And as I said, this does not mean I lean on it, because he was not limping to lean on a staff. He said, أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا, meaning I tie things to it. Literally, وَكَأَ, the verb وَكَأَ means to tie. So he says, I tie my luggage or whatever I'm trying to carry to that staff and carry it over my shoulder. أَتَوَكَّأُ عَلَيْهَا, I seek it or I use it to tie things to it so that I carry them. And this makes perfect sense now. وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى, I use it for other purposes. he used it for killing, and he used it for other things such as self-defense because he was missing his other arm. Now, in verse number 22, وَضْمُمْ يَدَكَ إِلَى جَنَاحِكَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him, your other hand, have it join your underarm, and it will, when you pull it out, it will come out completely restored. And that happened once. That happened exactly at the time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first addressed Musa. After that, it was already restored. It did not need to be regrown again and again and again. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only referred to it in one scene, which is the first time Musa entered the palace of Pharaoh. And only at that time, he was hiding it when he entered, and he pulled it out to show that that hand which you cut, which you harmed through your oppression to me and other Israelites, Allah has regrown it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was showing them that he was capable of regrowing organs and re-establishing life to dead parts of the body. And therefore, Pharaoh understood that there was no point in trying to kill Musa. And this answers a very critical question, which is, if Musa had killed a person and then ran away and then came back, why didn't Pharaoh arrest him and kill him? And the answer is, that sign of the regrown hand scared the hell out of Pharaoh and told Pharaoh that there was no point trying to cause any physical harm or kill this person, because he was clearly bringing something that none of us understood or was able to fight. And this was the answer. This was what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the Quran. فَأَرَاهُ الْآيَةَ الْكُبْرَى. This was the greatest sign. This is the greatest sign, not the staff. The staff was simply used to convince the other magicians. But the true sign was regrowing of the hand, which was harmed before. And this explains verse number 22, which says, مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوء, with no more harm, with no harm. An-Naml, number 12, with no harm, مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوء. And Al-Qasas, number 32, with no harm. So therefore, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing this scene, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is confirming that it was only used once upon the first entry into Pharaoh's palace after Musa returned into Egypt after his self-exile. I hope this was useful to you, and I consider this a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allowed me to see this and share it with you. Thank you for watching.